More people are incarcerated in the United States than in any other country, and some candidates in this year's U.S. presidential campaign are making it an important issue and pushing for criminal justice reform.
The American people want major reforms in a broken criminal justice system.
Much of the attention focuses on the disproportionately large numbers of African-American males and Latinos serving time in U.S. prisons. But according to the Institute for Criminal Policy Research, more than 200,000 women and girls are also incarcerated in America. That's more than 1/4 of an estimated 700,000 women and girls in correctional institutions around the world. Many have a history of drug addiction, and many end up in prison despite being victims of violence prior to their incarceration. Female prisoners also deal with some unique issues like pregnancy and the breakup of their families. And now we turn to some personal stories of women who served time behind bars in the United States. Donna Hilton was just 20 years old when she was convicted of kidnapping and second-degree murder in 1986. She's now free but on parole. Her story is part of the documentary A Walk to Freedom. Let's watch a clip.
Can you imagine being in a cinder block 6x10, cold, dark, dank room in this little window and people just looking in at you? You don't really understand what it can do to your psyche. People don't know that 85% of women are victims of abuse, have been traumatized at some point in their lives, and are in prison.
And Donna Hilton joins me now in the studio. She was released from prison in 2012 after serving 27 years. Also joining us from Connecticut is Elaine Lord. She was Donna's warden at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. The former prison superintendent has spent 20 years rehabilitating female prisoners, and she is now an advocate for criminal justice reform. Welcome to both of you to the show. Donna, let me start with you, and let's start at the beginning. You ended up in prison after being convicted of kidnapping and murder. You were just 20 years old at the time.
Yes.
What happened?
What happened? So many things happened. But for that particular horrible time, I got involved with a blackmail scheme. I said that I would participate in a blackmail scheme because my purpose was to earn money so that I can better myself in some way, and for me at that time it was modeling. And I thought that would get me out of the rut that I seemed to be in, and I would be able to provide for my daughter and myself. I didn't really understand how or know how because I was so young and no one ever really taught me that. I was taught so many other things. But I was always searching, trying to find a way to do good for myself and, you know, for my daughter. And being so young, it's difficult when you don't have positive influence or influencers around you. But there was always something in me that's searching, like this little light that I kept holding on to and knowing that there would be a better way.
And what was the actual crime that you were convicted of?
So the actual crime, the kidnapping and murder, because that is what it turned out to be. It started out as a blackmail scheme to blackmail Mr. V. For monies that was owed for some shady real estate scheme that he and my other co-defendants, some of them, were involved in. And it really was not, I was not aware or really understood what was going on. It didn't really matter to me. All I know is like, oh, well, if you say that, you know, you saw him trying to have a sexual type of encounter with one of my co-defendants, we'll pay you for just saying that because, you know, that would be the blackmail. And I didn't see, it's not that I saw something wrong or right in it, it just didn't matter at the time. I'm like, okay. I was so trying to focus on a way out, a way to get out of this pain and brokenness and just all the abuse that was surrounding me.
As you point out, you were very young, you were barely out of your teens. You were sentenced to a term in prison. You served 27 years. What was life like behind bars for you?
When I got sentenced to 25 to life, I just turned 20. I didn't even, I couldn't see that. I just couldn't understand what this 25 to life, all I really heard was life. And I didn't know how to understand that. There was no one there.
So did you think at the time that you would be spending, you were 20 years old.
Yes.
Did you think that you would be spending the rest of your life behind bars?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And to wrap your head around, you can't wrap your head around that.
Right.
And like I said, as smart as everyone said, you know, that was held against me, being smart. But no one was looked at what happened to this girl, this young woman. What were the factors in her life that led up to her even being involved in such, you know, a tragic, a horrible crime? Absolutely. But there were so many factors that led up to that. And no one would look at that. And no one would hear me when I tried to tell. When I tried to tell, on a couple of occasions, I was shut down. I even went I went to the police one time when I myself was kidnapped and abused really bad. I was burnt.
How old were you when that happened?
17.
Right.
Yes, 17. The police officer raped me, took advantage of the vulnerability, I guess, that he saw, and molested me in his detective car on a darkened street corner. So you learn, or I learned, not to trust, because every time I tried to reach out for help, for someone to just hear me, this kid yelling and screaming, "Help me, stop hurting me."
Let me bring Elaine into this conversation. Elaine, you know Donna. You were her warden at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. You are concerned about the fact that so many women are locked up in U.S. prisons. Do you feel that justice is being done here, or is the system, this justice system in the United States, in need of reform?
Well, it certainly is it's in need of big reform. We are putting way too many people in prison. And right now, the number of women going into prison is increasing faster than the number of men going to prison, which is not necessary. Neither growth is necessary. We need to stop and look at what we're doing. And I think after listening to Donna, you see some places or some junctures where certainly as a society we could have intervened in a different way and been more proactive with the family, with Donna as a young person. She was, as she says, very young when she came to prison, and that's true of most women. They're young when they come to prison, and they don't tend to be very dangerous. Even women who have had a violent crime don't tend to repeat that violence. So we're not dealing with the same issues here that we deal with men, but so often we tend to incarcerate them in the same way that we incarcerate men. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we need to find some avenues that are not as destructive, especially to families. A mother who has a little child, we've got to do a better job at looking how we can work with that family, maybe in the community in an alternative way. Now, maybe with Donna's crime, that wouldn't have been appropriate, but certainly it would be appropriate. The large increase right now of women coming to prison are for economic crimes. So women are having a hard time economically, and as a result, they're coming into prisons. And we're spending 2, 3, 4 times as much to keep them in prison as we would to give them the best services on the outside. I think that's a little crazy.
You say a lot of work has to be done. Do you sense that there is a will now on the part of criminal justice authorities to recognize that there is something deeply wrong with this system and that it needs to be reformed? Has that work started?
Well, I think there is a recognition that there has to be a change, but I think that recognition came about simply because the cost of imprisoning so many people was overwhelming. The cost was humongous. I mean, we could do so much more with that, and eventually it would bankrupt our country. We incarcerate more people than any place else in the world. I mean, and we want to see ourselves as a civilized society. I don't think those two go together. We obviously have to backtrack. We went into a great war on drugs, which still is, I think, not working. And we are beginning to learn that we need to put drug offenders into treatment. You can find some treatment in jails, but it's not at the level you would find on the outside. And yet, it's very expensive, because when you send someone to jail, 90% or more of what you're spending goes on security, and only a small, little amount goes into programs. So we have to look at what we're doing. We could, you know, it used to be said that we could send a young person to college. And more, we could send a young person to Harvard for what we're spending incarcerating them, and I think that's true. And now we have an elderly population because we don't want to let people out that have done a long time. And again, they're sick, they have needs. Is that the best thing we can do, set up nursing homes in our correctional facilities? I don't think so.
Donna, was that your experience as well, that when you went to prison, that most of the resources were put into security rather than into programs to rehabilitate people like yourself?
Yes, I totally agree with what Ms. Lord just said, that, you know, if the resources, the opportunities were there before prison, you know, before that step comes in, then absolutely we would not have the number of people in prisons that we do. And a lot of the crimes that people are in prison for, especially women, are not crimes. You know what I'm saying? There are situations, like she's saying, the war on drugs. The war on drugs, it only affected the Black and brown communities, and so you see the majority of people in prison for the war on drugs are Black and brown. And now that we see that it's so rampant in the white communities, the suburban white communities, the affluent white communities, now it's an issue. It's always been an issue.
Well, now it's being seen as a health issue.
Yeah, but it always was a health issue. You know what I mean? So it's now that it's hitting that population, so it's now we have to take a look. Now we really have to address it. You don't want to lock it up now. You don't want to lock them up because you know it is a health issue. So what's the difference in the Black and brown communities and the white community, where it's a health issue in the white community, but it's a crime to be dependent and to have this addiction to a drug that wasn't brought into the community by a Black or brown person?
You know, you talked a moment ago when we looked at that clip at the beginning of the show, the large number of women who end up in prison, and they are the victims of abuse, like yourself, trauma in their own lives. There's also child abuse, we know that. You pointed it out yourself. Did you see many women like that who had that experience, who ended up in prison because of that while you were there?
Sadly, I did. You know, when I went into prison, I thought that I was alone, that I was the only person. You know, as a kid, as a young person, you feel like you're alone in what happens to you. And so when I went to Bedford, and I got involved with the family violence program, who Ms. Lord was very, you know, she allowed that to happen. She allowed a safe space, a safe place for us to get together to speak on those, you know, conditions that we were under. And when I heard the stories of the other women, I really felt back. I was like, oh my God, I'm not alone. And I was happy to know that I wasn't alone, but I was also very, very sad. It hurt me to my core. I can't tell you how bad I felt. And it was, I think from that moment on, it was building in me, I have to be a part of this change. I have to do something. I have to do something, because I could not understand why so many women, so many young people have been abused, and the way in which the abuse happens and who abuses. You know, my story, a police officer, a school teacher, babysitter, I mean, you name it. Every person that represents an institution within this country has been involved in the abuse that happened to me and so many other women. And it doesn't matter, Black, brown, or white, or whatever. It's just what it is, and it should not be that. We should not be complacent with, oh, it is what it is. No, absolutely not. That is wrong. That is absolutely wrong.
Elaine, what about this issue of domestic abuse, women physically abused by their male partners in many instances, then serving prison time? I mean, we know that these cases are not isolated cases. There's a context within which they happen. I mean, I don't mean to excuse the fact that women have committed crimes and they go to prison for that, but how much does that contribute to the large numbers of women who are ending up behind bars?
Well, I think we have to begin thinking about the pathways that lead women to crime. And it's not just domestic abuse. I think what we know from research in this country and other countries is that the violence against women is systemic and that it happens throughout their lives. The story that Donna told you is similar to the stories of so many women. It starts as children, they're abused as children, both physically, emotionally, sexually, and then as teenagers, and maybe maybe they're battered by the males in their relationships. And that pathway is a tough one to live through. And it changes you, and it makes you susceptible to certain things. It's certainly going to make you angry, and it's going to, for some women, it makes them drug-seeking. They want to numb the pain, the psychic pain that they feel. Yes. And I also think we have to look, and there's new research in this country that shows that young women who are going into juvenile facilities, now we're talking about very young teenagers here, or 12-year-old, even before teenage years. They also have been sexually abused, physically abused, and if we put them in juvenile institutions, we can call it the pipeline to prison. Mm-hmm. It's going to just generate the next generation. So the next generation of our prison women is already in juvenile facilities in this country. And that's a terrible tragedy.